So I've pretty much got like everything on the Lost. I own just about everything you can get, and you can only get the soundtrack, and then you can get the film score soundtrack. You can get it on YouTube.
Naked saxophone dancing man, half naked.
Oh God, yeah,
Turn and toss.
I still believe. Absolutely,
I still believe that's it. Yeah.
And he was the saxophone player for Tina Turner. Did you know that?
I do, because you told me. I mean, no, I didn't. Tell me more.
He's still playing. He's still alive. He still does shows. I've caught a couple online. He's an amazing guy, and had a fully fledged career. Outside of Lost Boys and his own entity, because he worked and played with Tina Turner. So, he's an extraordinary guy, and is still touring, still tours the US. And, I mean, America just has the hugest fanfare and fan base still active today for the Lost Boys. Like, it's out of control. I've even seen Corey Feldman on stage, on the beach somewhere, it might have been Santa Monica, singing Cry Little Sister. Like, it's phenomenal. Like, to mark this interview as well, by the way, I will mention it's the 30-year anniversary. So Lost Boys is 1987.
Oh, you little trickster. That's why you wanted to do it today.
And everyone's, like every 5 or 10 years, they'll find an excuse to celebrate. And at the moment, there's some really cool stuff going down. So the 25th anniversary was great because you got some special edition DVDs and Blu-rays that hadn't been out before, which are packed with extra features. And now the 30th anniversary, other little things will pop up. But the fans, man, they're still going absolute ballistic. I'm a member of a group, a Lost Boys group now, and some of the guys in there, like, I thought I was a hardcore, but I've met some of the guys in there, and they're just extraordinary. Like, people that have devoting their lives to the film. It's almost like a religion, man. It's the same sort of stuff I saw with Lord of the Rings. It was there were people that kind of live by a code that is a kind of combination of values and references from the movie. Like, it's extraordinary. I actually have a Lost Boys Facebook fan page as well, if anyone wants to check it out, which is just at the Lost Boys fan. And that page that I manage is going really well as well. So it's a chance for me to post up all the stuff that I do that's kind of relative.
And that red hat that you got maggots, Michael. You're eating maggots. How do they taste?
See, man, that's what I'm talking about. The memorabilia, the merchandise. I think I might have found that through Etsy. And it was a guy that, is custom making all these caps. And, that one just happened to have the maggots reference on it. And I thought, I've got to get that. And it's tricky, it's like anything that's custom made, as long as you don't say the full title, but everyone knows what it is. You can still kind of make and release this stuff, and there's a whole range of kind of custom action figures and stuff that you can get out there that aren't specifically called the Lost Boys, but they might be called David Vampire, or I've got another one called the Distinctive Dummy, and there's like 70 in the world, and mine's like number 68 or something, like There's some really cool stuff out there. I think the prize, though, is the Santa Carla 1/6 scale action figure. I've got David, and it's like epic. I even showed him off in one of the episodes of the NHP Diaries that was online last year. I mean, it's like $1,000, bro, just for this doll. Do you know what I mean? Like, then I've seen some crazy stuff. There's a David full scale bust online, and I've seen him auction, and it's like 10 grand. The novel, which is the film book to the movie, I purchased recently because it's packed with sort of extra goodies and stuff that doesn't happen in the movie. And I hunted it for probably a couple of years. I saw one on eBay that was going for $700, but I managed to get mine, I think, for probably about $150. I think the guy that put it up didn't really know what he was selling, so I got lucky.
And you read it, or?
Yeah, I'm about halfway, and so far, it's really cool. I'm taking it slowly. I'm savouring it.
Any differences so far? Or?
Yeah, there's kind of extra lines and extra kind of moments, plus all the deleted scenes are in there as well, but as a chapter and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to read. I do think it's Yeah, it did. It definitely brought me back. There was stuff in there that I hadn't discovered before. But of course, now you can get the comics. There's comics now that bridge the gap between Lost Boys and the sequels. And now they're in pre-production for the new TV series, which is going to span like 100-year gap or something. Like there's going to be. Oh, dude, it's phenomenal. So I'm talking to a mate of mine in LA, trying to get him to get me some info on it, because I'd love to kind of get on it in any capacity, even if it was crew, So sort of looking into it, but it looks pretty big. A lot of the fans aren't into it. They kind of think anything that's not solely Lost Boys is kind of like a blasphemy. But you always get that. You always get that with sequels or prequels and things like that. Sometimes fans aren't happy. But I think if they do it right, it could be phenomenal.
What was the first time you watched Lost Boys?
Good question. So the first time I kind of had an experience with Lost Boys, man, I was in my very first job. Like I was working at what was called a movie warehouse for my uncle. So we would get all the videotapes that would then be bought by the video stores. A really, really choice job, for a teenager, because I was just basically bathing in amongst movies, and I could watch any of them for free. And he would get all the posters, rolls and rolls and rolls of these posters. And one day after a shift, he kind of said, go out the back and go up the stairs. And I said, what's up there? I didn't realize there was like a loft. And on this loft were, just scores of one sheets and full-size posters. And the one right in the middle kind of grabbed my eye, which was the Lost Boys poster. And I think I grabbed like about 10 of them, and I rolled them up, put them in a canister. I was on a racer, dude. I was a teenager, just on my bike. And I kind of somehow attached this canister to my racer and just rode home. Couldn't wait till I get this thing up on my wall. I was just such a kid and so into it. So I would have watched it on video, though, I think at home, maybe as a preview tape or something like that, because we were lucky that I worked there because we got all the preview tapes. And I had a magazine as well. I had a Fangoria magazine, and a cover that kind of frightened me, and a whole bunch of people, anyone who saw this cover in the house was frightened. It was kind of a burnt guy, giving a kind of giving the finger up, the devil sign or whatnot. And I'd kind of, after I watched the film, I realized it was like Paul from the Lost Boys. It was one of the characters, and the Fangoria magazine had done, a whole kind of scoop on the special effects makeup on the film. So, and I've still got that cover. I took a photo and put it up on Facebook recently, and people really freaked out. Like, so some of the comments were kind of like, what the F is that? And like, oh my God, that's freaky. And, like it still holds up, man. I mean, 30 years later, you can still prank people. I mean, that's how good the movie is. It's standing the test of time. It's becoming a timeless classic. It's Warner Brothers. But Warner, I think, really is my favorite studio because, I mean, aside from the fact they also pumped out Queen of the Damned, which I'm in, Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee, another one of my idols. They seem to pump out just the classics. I think Warner's got, particularly, it's a funny thing, but Warner seemed to pick up a lot of the movies too where like a star has died, and particularly in the Aaliyah Queen of the Damned case, and look at Bruce Lee Enter the Dragon, and there's a lot of their films. Good call, brother. So yeah, I don't know, just look at the Warner catalog, and they just seem to have the films that I like the most. I just think they're the best studio in LA. Yeah, so that's kind of but I mean, look, the reason the movie is it holds a special place, I guess, is because when you're a teenager, or let's say you're a young person, it could be any movie or even a book that kind of touches a soul or reaches out to you, something that you can relate to. That always happens to people, and it kind of stays with you. It's kind of like your birthright or something into your taste of genre. It could have been friggin', I don't know, it could have been a comedy. It could have, well, even though Lost Boys is a horror comedy, but what I'm trying to say is it could have been any movie. You know what I mean? Like each person's got their own favorite film, and it touches them for a different reason. Normally it'll be, in those sort of early years when your brain's forming, and you'll be searching for answers. And that's what the movie's like as well. It's very much a sort of a coming of age, but in a vampiric way. There's a lot of experimentation with substance abuse and the divorced family and themes that are still common. Music, rock and roll, motorbikes. Bonfires on the beach. There's so many kind of key elements in there. I think that's what Joel Schumacher did so well, because he's just created this kind of cocktail of 80s fire, this is a guy who had beforehand had done St. Elmo's Fire, and then went on to do Flatliners and other films that I adore, Falling Down, A Time to Kill, 8mm. You could arguably say he was responsible for Matthew McConaughey's birth into fame. I think 8mm is probably one of Nicolas Cage's best performances, because a lot of his films now, as we know, they're a little bit mediocre. The other reason why Lost Boys did so well was because of the powerhouses in all of the departments. I mean, you've got Richard Donner, who directed Goonies and obviously Lethal Weapon.
And The Omen as well.
That's right. And he was supposed to do Lost Boys, but he sort of was too busy and turned around and said, why don't we get Joel to do it? And what an amazing decision. But then also, having him still as a producer, it's a powerhouse situation. So whenever you do that, I do think you get a better film, you get a special film. And the DOP as well, who was an Academy Award winner. I mean, he was the DOP that shot Raging Bull, I think it was. It's just one of these really rare situations. At that time, there was so many sort of B-grade horrors and comedies coming out, but you didn't have a big studio backing you, so you'd get like your Trauma Toxic Avenger, and that was really awesome, which I actually love. And, your Friday the 13th and this and that, and, your first Nightmare on Elm Street, people were breaking out. But Lost Boys kind of put a stamp on that and said, okay, we've got a major studio is going to give it a crack. And they took a risk. And that's why it's turned out so well, because they had the money and they had the resources to kind of make a fully fledged vampire movie, if that makes sense.
And it is definitely an expression of youth that is probably the most captivating thing about this film. As you pointed out, the bonfires, the staying up late, partying all night. Be a vampire, never
Sleep
die.
all day, party all night, never grow old, never die. It's fun to be a vampire. The catchphrase, it's just got all the ingredients, and they just kind of nailed it. It's a 100% film. It's a 10 out of 10. The only people I've heard that have slandered it or the haters that have got on board are people that just didn't understand that era. Do you know what I mean? People that weren't, they didn't have access to those sort of movies. They weren't watching them. Do you know? They were perhaps they were country people, perhaps they were religious people, or they were people that weren't watching movies as such. Just different types of people that don't understand it. But if you're a movie goer, you're totally going to understand it. I talked to a guy the other day on the Lost Boys group that I'm in, and he said to me, "Nathan, I watch this film once a month." It's like. And he's an adult. Do you know what I mean? Like this is like a married guy with kids. It takes you back. It's been described as one of the movies that encapsulated the late 80s better than any other movie. When you put it on, you are actually taken back. When I put on a movie that's made in 1987, it's very hard for me to kind of get engrossed in it. Do you know what I mean? I'm still watching it as a voyeur. I'm still very much, oh, yeah, that was great, but it's a little bit pedestrian. But when you put Lost Boys in, you can't help but you get sucked in.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's hypnotizing.
It really is hypnotizing, and you look at it being a timeless classic. It is, and I know that because all I got to do is turn around, look at one of my shelves, and I've got the movie in every format. I've got it in beta, VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. I've even got the friggin' laser disc. I've got it on 8mm video. I've even got PSP, if you can believe that.
Wow.
One of my mates had a go at me though, and he said, "Oh, but you don't have the film canister." And I was like, "Oh, you bastard!" But I do have it in every other format. Which is awesome. So, and it stands a test of time. There's not many other movies that kind of do that. I've got one other hardcore mate that's got Evil Dead, I think, in every format, which is like totally cool. Why wouldn't you? It's totally acceptable.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. One thing I don't know if people know, my collection, my movie memorabilia collection in general is pretty extensive. And so I was actually talking to someone else about perhaps even putting on an exhibition at some time of my own for Lost Boys, and showcasing some of the movie stuff that I've got, kind of like an art exhibition.
That'd be good, or even a YouTube video.
That would be great too, bro. Actually, that would save me a lot of time and money. Yeah, maybe I'll do a video. That's a great idea.
And because it's free, you'll probably actually make money too.
That's awesome. And just kind of show it off because, as I said, I do have a pretty big collection there, and I think some people would really appreciate that.
I think a lot of people would, yeah.
You know what I mean? But also the music, bro. The music touched people. The soundtrack, again, was kind of deemed one of the greatest soundtracks to a film of all time. I mean, apart from the fact you got 2 tracks in there from NXS and Jimmy Barnes, your other songs like Lost in the Shadows, which is now the title of a book. There's a filmmaker in the UK called Paul Harris, and he's as devoted to Lost Boys as any other fan. He's probably right at the height of the fan base. And he's putting out a book called Lost in the Shadows, and I've purchased one. I've pre-ordered, but it's already sold out. I mean, it's already sold out across the world. And he's been in LA and he's been doing Q&As with the existing cast from the Lost Boys. And again, just goes to show you how huge this film still is. But the music's amazing. There's the Echo and the Bunnymen. They do People Are Strange.
Yeah, Echo and the Bunny, Killing Moon, yeah.
And again, the Doors reference, because in the Vampire Cave, there's a Jim Morrison portrait up on the back wall of the cave, which again kind of encapsulates where these guys are at, the time frame and the love of the Doors and Jim Morrison. It's interesting because when I looked at Jason Patric, I thought he could have played Jim Morrison. He looked very, very similar. So, I mean, I know Val Kilmer did it and he did an excellent job in the Doors movie, but I always wondered why it wasn't Jason Patric, because he actually looked a bit more like him in real life, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And he has I guess he's less of a star than Val Kilmer. Jason Patric's a lot more grounded. And what's weird is Jason Patric, I think he is one of the reasons why The Lost Boys is timeless, because his face doesn't look like it's etched in the 80s. It doesn't really look like it's etched at any time. It looks contemporary. And if you look at him up until that brilliant movie that came out in 2002, Narc, which starred Jason Patric.
Oh, mate, that's one of my favourite movies.
It's a brilliant, brilliant film. He still looks very similar, and he carries that sort of timelessness around with him. I can only really think of one other male actor who's like that, and that's Viggo Mortensen.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Even though he ages quite a bit for some reason, as opposed to Jason Patric, who seems not to.
Did you know that Viggo was also the original cast idea for Dances with Wolves?
No. That's interesting.
It is, isn't it? And because there's this interesting interview where Peter Jackson said about when Lord of the Rings came out, and he sort of turned to camera and he said, no, Viggo, it's kind of very much... him playing Aragorn is very much life imitating art. It really is the return of the king. And I wondered what he meant by that. And it wasn't until I discovered that he was supposed to be playing lead in Dances with Wolves. I think that's what the reference was entailing. Because he kind of had a few big roles but had been promised other larger roles, but then he kind of had gone into hiding, almost like a semi-retirement. And then he came back out and exploded with Lord of the Rings. But that actually brings us back to Queen of the Damned, because Stuart Townsend, that I worked with on that, he was originally cast as Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. Did you know that?
No,
yes.
No, I didn't.
Yes. So when I met Stuart on set, the first thing I asked him was about Lord of the Rings. Because I'm an epic fan, as much as I am with Lost Boys. In fact, I'm huge on Lord of the Rings. So there was another kind of weird, I don't know what you want to call it, coincidence, connection. But it was an opportunity, I guess, to ask him firsthand about that. But they shot with him for about a month or two and then decided that he looked too young, which was true. They needed a man, to play Viggo, and Stuart was still kind of coming out of his shell, and because Damned was his first big theatrical feature. Before that, he'd only done a couple of big indies, Shooting Fish and Resurrection Man, and a couple of other bits and bobs. So that did make sense. But I think Viggo, in retrospect, was definitely the right choice.
Yeah, he's got a weathered look to him. He does look like a fallen soldier. But okay, so you mentioned it before, working on what's called Queen of the Damned, and then we'll get back to Lost Boys. So what exactly was it like? I've seen, I did look on YouTube for you on YouTube, and I didn't watch the whole movie.
No.
I've seen it, but I don't remember you in it the very first time. I think it was like 2002. But I do remember you were in a fight scene. What else were you in, and what was it like working on the set? And just tell us what you can.
I think it's probably, deserving of a separate pod, because that's a whole experience. Whereas I'm like, sort of keep this one on Lost Boys. But in a nutshell, I'll give you the short version. Absolutely epic. Being on a Warner Brothers set. And I was also a very young actor. Pretty much. Chance of a lifetime, you know what I mean? Dream come true, to be able to say, hey, I'm going to work today. I'm on set. I'm with these international actors and I'm playing a vampire and it's Warner Brothers. You can't really, you can't get better than that when your passion as a child has been to watch movies like The Lost Boys. Do you know what I mean? So it was incredible. Highlights was my Uncle Michael, who I think I told you recently passed this year.
Yeah,
he's the chief carpenter. Thank you, bro. He was the chief carpenter. So, all the sets you're looking at, the stages and even all the music videos, everything, he was the chief carpenter. So, I had real hands-on experience into seeing how that all worked. But yeah, I think that's definitely deserving of another pod.
Absolutely. Well, that's a promise you've made. So,
okay.
No, that's really nice that you had two great experiences on that set. So back to Lost Boys.
Yeah.
So did you ever try and thrust this movie upon your friends and fail or succeed, or what was it like?
Being in primary school, I think they used to call me the gore freak, because I just was obsessed with horror. But I loved gore. I loved the movies that had, really heavy prosthetics. And I think that's probably what drew me to Lost Boys, because the makeup was so good. And the death scenes were really, really good, and the blood and the macabre was just spot on. So I would always be trying to test friends and play these films that I could stomach that most of them couldn't. And there are these stories about kids coming over to watch movies and ending up, being, almost forced to watch a horror film with me and then run screaming from the house, There was this one birthday party I had. I was really young, bro. I was only like 5 or 6 years old, and I was watching horror. And I remember sitting at the front, kind of, eyes wide open, enjoying all this stuff. And I kind of turned around, and the room was empty. So like all the kids had run. So now I was always ahead of the 8 ball, but I think it was more about, for me, it was more about the artistry. I knew it was fake, and I was really just kind of enthralled at how they could create all this stuff, and whereas I think other kids might have been drawn into the fantasy a bit too much and got scared. So I was always looking at it a little bit analytically, which makes sense because, now I obviously make films, so it does make sense. But, yeah, definitely we used to push the envelope, and there was one really close childhood friend, when I was a teenager, who was a neighbour, and I think I scarred him with the Nightmare on Elm Street films. This poor kid would sort of wake up in the night screaming with nightmares, and his mother had a real go at me. She came down one day and said, the next time he wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, you're looking after him, not me, So I'd get told off regularly by friends' parents. But yeah, on Lost Boys, I mean, look, even being such a fan, I've done a little sneaky, tricky little thing actually, where I've told you about my new film, Eye Portrait, and I've actually, because I love the kind of Where's Wally. I love to have prop spotting and stuff like that in my movies, and I actually have put in a couple of Lost Boys props into this film. So they're not like right in your face, but like if you're a hardcore, you might notice it.
I like to think I mean, not necessarily a hardcore, but I've definitely seen this movie over 25 times throughout my life.
That is awesome. So you can't see that. That's amazing you even said that. Most people won't even watch any film more than that unless, it's really good. So again, that's another massive testament, and particularly yourself being a learned, video store guide like myself. For you to watch anything that many times, I mean, it must be awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. But yeah, it is an awesome movie. It was the very first VHS and Laserdiscs that I bought.
Oh wow!
As a combo, I saved up, and it was actually just in the store, and it was rated M, so I couldn't really buy anything that was R. So
Yeah.
there was Day of the Dead or that.
Funny you should say Day of the Dead, because one of my friends who's an actor, that's his favourite film, and he's as into that as what I am Lost Boys. That's funny you should say that.
Lost Boys, it played a pivotal role at the beginning of your life, but how many times did it have a pivotal role throughout your life?
I guess I'm always a guy that loves connections. So, like the whole thing, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, sort of, I really love that theory, and I try to sort of emulate it somehow in my own life. I look for the connections to people and things. And I remember when I was talking to Verity East, who I acted with in Sheepdog Massacre. She's such a stunning woman. And the first thing we started talking about was Lost Boys, before we acted together. And she's like, oh, yeah, I've met Kiefer Sutherland. And I was like, oh, God, there's a connection. I got excited. And then in Colorblind, Anne Gautier that I act with, she's actually best friends with Diane Weist's daughter.
Really?
Yeah, and I was kind of getting really excited about that, because I was like, well, if you're friends with her daughter, and her daughter, amazingly, had made a comment on one of our posts on Instagram or Facebook, I can't remember which one, on our last day of shoot when we were together. So that was kind of another connection. Do you know what I mean? I love these little coincidences and things that happen. But my other funny connection was Alex Winter, who plays Marco. He's in Bill and Ted's, obviously, and Terry Camilleri, who's in Bill and Ted's, he plays Napoleon. I'd had him in one of my short films last year called Double Trouble. So
really,
so a couple of times Terry's posted shots of him with Alex Winter, and I've often thought, maybe try to get in touch, or next time I'm in LA, get him to try and get an introduction, because that'd be amazing. Yeah, so there's been those little connections. But obviously the really big connection is actually having, the 2 Coreys cast in my unmade Black Mass, which you and I have obviously already done a podcast on. So, I've met Corey Feldman, a couple of times. So, that for me was almost like kind of, touching ground, if you know what I mean. That sort of experience, you can't replace. And I think when you do meet someone like that, that's pretty much A-list Hollywood, and you are shaking hands with someone that, is from your favorite film, it's a really special thing that happens. And it just kind of feels like sort of confirmation. And, I'm very lucky to have that opportunity. A lot of people, dream for these opportunities, and maybe they happen. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, so that was great. And Corey Haim, as we mentioned in the last pod, obviously he's dead now, but I have kept in touch with his mother, Judy, and she'll tell you, like anybody, that Lost Boys was obviously the biggest film that he ever did. That was the movie that made him. So
absolutely. Well, it was an 80s film because it has the Haim brothers. And I'm not saying that as an understatement.
The Coreys.
It's important for many reasons, but it's important for that as a time capsule of the 80s, because you didn't really have an essence of the 80s unless you saw a Corey Haim film.
Correct.
And Corey Haim, actually, Haim and Feldman, for Heimdog and Felster?
It's Heimster and Feldog.
Heimster and Feldog, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't have that until you saw that on your Saturday night, and that's truly mindless entertainment. And I think their relationship is best served in this film, but it's sort of perfected in the movie License to Drive, because they're given a starring role.
That's right. And it's all these movies that start with L that kind of freaks me out. License to Drive, Lost Boys, Lucas, like it's the same letter. So they sit all nicely together on the store video shelf. Do you know what I mean? It's interesting. Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, those guys encapsulated the time as well. And, particularly the fashion and the hair and the way you would speak, and, young guys wanting hot cars and hot girls, that was every man's fantasy. And we've got to remember too, this is before the internet. No internet in those days. So, if you were a young guy in a movie, particularly coming out of Hollywood, you were a legend, and there's a video I've got, I might send you the link, of Corey Haim speaking on stage at a particular convention, and it's one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. That there are hundreds, if not thousands, of girls screaming like in absolute hysteria as soon as Haim walks onto the stage. I might have mentioned this to you before. And, that kind of star power back then, because we didn't have the internet, people didn't have access to all the other information that's in the world. We were a little bit naive or something. We were a little bit living in our own little plastic bubbles. So when someone did a movie that was epic, it was a big scale thing, and it was a big deal, and it would draw a lot of hysteria.
So what were your favourite moments of the film?
Favourite moments? I've really always loved the opening. I just love the picturesque view of Santa Monica, Santa Carla, and I think probably the Vampire Cave. And there's actually a cave here in Warrandyte. So the Warrandyte mines, they still exist. It's illegal to go in there now. But when I was sort of early 20s, I used to go down there with my posse, and we used to go into this cave like at night. And I've actually got some Polaroid photos of this. Cool. And sort of go down there and sort of role playing, trying to be Lost Boys or something. But, we would light the bonfire and the drum. There was a drum in there, that you'd light the fire and you'd put candles everywhere. And, it's just used to get into it. So, I think the cave scene was probably one of my favorites. That sort of rang bells. And, as a teenager as well, I would do that. I would spend a lot of time kind of like in caves or at the beach. It was just very similar. I've always thought St Kilda and the Luna Park and the Esplanade is similar to those scenes in the movie, and I always would say to my mates, we could do this. We could do our own version here. Back then I wanted to do the Lost Girls and shoot it around St Kilda. There's places here where you could actually do that. Mm. So, I love the landscape and the characters and obviously the storyline and the vampirism and the girls. And I think Star is just like, she's just so incredibly attractive. She's just like your choice, kind of 80s girl. That's how all the girls should look back then, in my eyes.
Jamie Gertz.
Jamie Gertz. That's right.
She was my first crush too. I don't know if she was your first, but she was mine because I was maybe 7 when I saw that film first.
I think my first crush was the girl that was in Can't Buy Me Love. I don't know if you've seen this, like a cheesy 80s film.
Yeah, with Dermot Mulroney, is that it?
It's got Patrick Dempsey.
Patrick Dempsey, that's it.
And I'm going to tell you a true story. This one might freak you out.
Yes, please.
When I started out acting, I was asked to do a casting for, I think it was called Blonde, a Marilyn Monroe thing. They actually asked me to come in and do a read for the role. I think it was Cass. I'm just a bit sort of blank on this. Yeah. It was so long ago. And I thought I was going to get a dialogue part in this show, and it was because this was just after Queen of the Damned, I think. And Patrick Dempsey actually came to town.
Yep.
Kind of said, "I want that role."
Really?
It was Blonde. So it was a miniseries called Blonde, and the role was a guy called Cass, which was one of Marilyn Monroe's lovers. And I always felt that amazing because, Can't Buy Me Love was kind of like the girl that he'd acted with, and that was kind of like my first childhood crush.
What about any things that you don't like about the movie?
About Lost Boys?
Yeah.
I always thought Max was a little bit, I don't know, when I first saw him, I didn't like him. The father.
Edward Herman, yeah.
Yeah, Edward. I just couldn't, I didn't quite get it. And it took me a while for sort of him to grow on me, but now I sort of love the guy, and I've got a poster. I've got an actual poster of just him on my wall at home, an 80s Lost Boys kind of rendition type poster, a fan thing. He died in 2014. The cast from this movie have passed now. Obviously Edward's passed, and Barnett Hughes passed, which was the grandpa. Corey Haim's passed, and Brooke McCarter, who plays Paul, who's one of the vampires, the other blonde vampire. He passed only a couple of years ago, which leads me into my other topic of conversation, is that I'm actually, and this is exclusive for the Sixth Dimension.
Awesome. I love that.
This is exclusive only. Never been mentioned before. But I am the first person in the world, as we speak, to be getting a 1/6 scale custom action figure made of the character Paul, played by Brooke Carter from Lost Boys.
Oh, wow.
So I've actually been talking to the guy in the studio this morning, and he is also the guy that on the quiet, he does your Robot Chicken.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so they do like all the characters, so they're like legit Hollywood.
Yeah.
I'm commissioning one of their guys there to do Paul from the Lost Boys, because you can get scores of Davids. So I thought, well, I'll get Paul, and if that turns out well, then I'll probably commission them to do Dwayne next. But mate, it's going to be epic. So I've already got sort of pictures they're sending me of the stages and progress of creation. The painting, the molding, the sculpting, because they're doing one human and one as vampire.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Once I post this up on all the Lost Boys groups and fan pages and stuff, they're going to go ballistic.
Any chance of getting a Marco figure?
Yeah, well, they've already done Alex Winter as from Bill and Ted.
Oh, okay.
So they're thinking of doing a mod, so that then I can kind of over time. I mean, this will literally take a couple of years, because this stuff it's a very slow process. And you've also got to get the bodies, and then you've got to get a tailor to make the costume. It's a very long process. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, eventually, that's the plan, is to have the whole gang. So.
And what about Star? Do you have Star already?
No, I mean, Star was never really made. There's only one guy in the States who I've actually been talking to as well, who did Star, but as a very small, just your normal kind of blister pack, like 4-inch figure, but they're not very detailed. Figures that are stand out would be, your Jason Patrick and your David in the NECA range. Mm-hmm. And then all these other customs that pop up, like your Santa Carla David, that's your next big kind of film character. And now we're looking at the other stuff. So yeah, man, it's all exciting.
You know what they need to build? They need to build one of those figurine things for like just the sign of Santa Carla.
Well, someone's actually done it. You can get not in the big scale, but you can get a door sign, which is wooden. It's quite good. And you can get Welcome to Santa Carla, and then you turn it over, and it's on the back. It has Murder Capital of the World.
What stands out to you about the sequels? Because there were a lot of sequels. I saw them. I didn't like them that much, but I didn't feel they betrayed the original. They stuck fairly okay to the original, but it didn't ruin it for me.
I think in our other pod, when we're talking about Black Mass and the kind of rebirth of the two Coreys, it really came from that. It was a domino effect. Feldman still does a lot of those sort of B grade and then straight to DVD movies. Yep. And so the fact that they cashed in on the Frog Brothers as a franchise, I think they saw an opportunity and they just kind of went for it. They didn't expect big things. It was a little bit hit and miss. The one good thing about those sequels, though, is they spawned all these comics, and the comics are really good. They're actually better than those films.
Okay.
So they've kept the kind of the world and the landscape alive. Now, people are going to say those films suck, but now, hey, as we said, now they're going to make a friggin' TV series. So, it's really clay upon clay, and without one, you don't have the other. Should they have not made any of it and just kept with the original film? That's your definitive question. Again, people are going to say leave it alone, and then other people are going to go, I love it. I just want to explore it. I want more. Give me what you got. So it's really, again, it's split decision. It'll be some will love it and some will hate it.
Anything else before we part ways?
I'm just going to say, I still think Lost Boys is, as I said, up there with, one of the greatest films of all time for me personally and across the world. I think in the Black Mass script, which you've also read, you can see I've even tried to incorporate those elements where you've got, do you know what I mean? Like we were talking before about having, the right costumes and hair and props and locations and all the rest of it. I've tried to put all my stuff in there. So we just hope, fingers crossed, one day someone, can identify that. But you know, I'm just like everybody else when it comes to Lost Boys. I'm a huge fan, and I know other people too. And I'm just celebrating art, my friend. And I think there's other movies I love that we could talk about. This just happens to be one of them. Celebrating art, you know, on this scale can only be a positive. It keeps the imagination alive, and it certainly helps me when I'm writing my other films, because it's giving me, it's like feeding me. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're feeding the beast is what you're doing. So that can only be a good thing. If you feel good about it, then you do it.
Nathan Hill, filmmaker, thank you very much. Next time we'll be talking about his experiences on Queen of the Damned. He promised and he can't get back on it. It's a verbal contract, otherwise I'll sue. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I'll talk to you next time, man.
Thanks, man.
This series was produced by Sebastian Mittelman and devised by William Thompson and Sebastian Mittelman. Stay alive till next time. Oh, and a very special thanks to our associate producer Nathan Hill.